everyone. Welcome all ISPA friends. We have a great session for you, so we're very happy to see you at the 75th anniversary dining table. This is going to be an interesting hour and 15 minutes, and so definitely listen up. I'm Jackie Davis. I'm the former director of the Lead Center of Kansas, and then the executive director of the Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center, and now doing individual consulting, especially with something called One Shared World. And I'd like to turn it over to the co-moderator, my new friend Rita.
Hi, everyone. Hi, yes. This is a dinner party for everyone, right? And we're going to co-create this session. I am Rita, Ezenwa-Okoro from Nigeria. I lead social transformation using the performing arts in 3 different ways. First, as the founder and lead visionary of Street Project Foundation, an organization that uses performing arts to facilitate youth leadership development, social mobilization, and cross-cultural dialogue. I'm also the executive director of the Global Play Brigade, a movement that has a mission to make play mainstream, play which is seen as a tool for development for children. Our goal is to integrate play into every fabric of human life, especially amongst adults. I'm also an author of the book, Doing, Being, Becoming, for the love of the creative arts. And I'm a millennial, and I'm excited to be co-moderating this session with this gorgeous baby boomer here, Jackie. I'd like to turn it over to Tori.
Hi there, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm here as, I guess, the baby boomer panelist to go with the moderator, but it's great to see you all. It's always hard to do the session right after lunch because there's usually a little this. So we're taking you straight to the dinner party. I'm Tori Bailey. I have been working in theaters in one way or another for over 50 years. I started out studying and as a performer and rapidly figured out that wasn't right. I then worked for about 25 years producing in the not-for-profit sector, primarily here in New York City at the Manhattan Theater Club doing new plays. And so that was 22 years or so. And then I took what I thought would be a 4 or 5 year detour and went to work as the executive director at a performing arts service organization here in New York City, TDF, Theater Development Fund, which is an organization whose mission is to develop new audiences and to make sure that the theater is accessible for everyone. And I did that for about 20 years and thought it was time for a change. I know baby boomers are known for not wanting to move over, but I actually thought it was time to change. I was proved right. Diksha Gar, who's here, is the new executive director, and it just feels so fabulous to see someone new doing it. But having moved on, what I'm now doing as I work on what is this next chapter is I have always been a teacher. I'm continuing to teach. I teach at the School of the Arts at Columbia University, primarily managers and producers. And I'm also working with a couple of other colleagues, also baby boomers, working to find ways to help support the performing arts sector, particularly the theater, at a time when it is facing such huge challenges, not so much working one-on-one with individual theaters, but looking at the idea of cohorts and community. And by definition, that means that we are working with younger leaders and younger artists, and that's been really exciting. And I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. Merindah.
There you go.
Hello everybody, my name is Merindah Donnelly and I'm a proud Indigenous woman from the Wiradjuri Nation, which is on the east coast of Australia, in the centre of New South Wales. I was born in my country and my family relocated not long after that, and I grew up on what is now my husband's country, in a very, very small community with a mainly Indigenous population. There was only 500 of us that lived there. And so I had a very different upbringing to, I guess, the kind of world that I am a part of these days, and I never thought in a million years that I would be here. When I was younger, though, my dad, who's First Nations, and my mum, who's white, my mum insisted that I attend ballet classes. So she would drive myself and a bunch of the other Indigenous kids from the school and the community into town, into ballet classes once a week. And I studied classical ballet. I went on to study classical ballet. I left school when I was 14 years old, moved to Sydney, and I went on to study classical ballet. So I am now the co-CEO and executive producer of Black Dance. Black Dance is the national Indigenous service organisation and producing house for First Nations contemporary dance in Australia.
Thank you, Merindah. Nwabisa.
Malweni, my name is Nwabisa Plaatjie. Nwabisa means to make others happy. I am from South Africa in Eastern Cape, Ecala. I like stories. I'm a theatre director and producer. I think I've reached that part in my career where I am scared of titles or schools or listing everything that I've been part of. My recent interests are really spending time and making friends with, I don't know what to, I want to say older people, my grandparents. So I've really been spending time with some of the legends in South Africa and just listening to them and their experiences and their stories. That's what I find most interesting now.
Ryan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan. I'm Gen Z. So I'm here representing Gen Z. I'm currently an actor, a student, and an aspiring arts professional. I currently go to NYU, and I'm so excited to be here. Storytelling has always been such a deep and foundational part of my life, starting out as part of my family, and now I'm so blessed that it has become part of my academic and my professional life as well. So I'm so excited to share everything with everyone here.
Thank you, all of you. It's so great to have this terrific panel. Okay, now the title is The Generational Divide, and I wanted to make sure that everybody knows who they are in that. I don't think anybody's in the Great Generation, which was 1901 to 1927. The Silent Generation, 1928 to 1945, maybe. The Baby Boomers, we have a couple of Baby Boomers on stage. Who are the Baby Boomers out there? Raise your hand, please. Okay. And then we have Gen X from 65 to 80. Any of those? Oh my goodness. Now I know where it all is. The Millennials, 1981 to 95. Not bad. Okay, the Gen Zs, 1997 to 2010. Any Gen Zs? A little bit. And then this new one that I didn't know about called Generation Alpha. Do we have any Generation Alphas after 2011? Anybody?
No.
Okay. So just pretend you're up here with us. You're at the long table. It's the 75th anniversary. We've all been around here and there for a while, and this is the way it's going to work. Rita's going to ask a couple of really good questions to the group that's sitting here now. And then, after we've disposed of those two questions consecutively, then we will invite some of our guests here and here to come up where they can fit at the table, and they can comment on something they liked or didn't like, or they can ask a new question, but it keeps the conversation going. Then, at around 15 to 20 minutes left, we're going to invite you to come to the microphone, which is, I don't know where it is, it's house left or house right, and it will be your opportunity if you have a comment or you want to disagree or agree with anything that's being said. I will tell you, we've had a couple of meetings just to stage this, and I had moments when other people's opinions made me go, no, not, baby boomers are not like that. So it's going to be interesting. I think I've covered everything so far, so I'm turning it over to you for the question.
All right. as a millennial, I often find myself in between the baby boomers' tendencies or stereotypes and the Gen Zs. And I could use an example. I usually would hold a notebook and have my mobile phone. But sometimes I just am fascinated how Gen Zs can do all of their work on their mobile phones. I mean, an entire presentation. And so one of the things I value most is the fact that I'm able to cross this divide. And I'm quite inquisitive to find out, what do you wish other generations should value about your generation? Anyone?
At the table.
I'll jump in. I think that I referenced it a teeny bit in the introduction. I think that one of the things that I sometimes feel as someone who's a baby boomer is that for a variety of reasons that are maybe too complicated to get into here, including the fact that some healthcare has improved, we're living longer, we can work longer, and we grew up in an environment, I think we actually grew up with the value of being useful, and it means that we're not necessarily interested in stepping aside. But what that also means is that we have a reputation for not stepping aside. And it means that as people come up, there is a perception of there not being a place for them at the table, which leads to a perception that we are rigid, that we are perhaps conservative in that we like the way things were done, that we don't trust the young. And I find it ironic because, of course, when I was a teenager, the dominant slogan was, don't trust anyone over 30, right? That's what the baby boomers grew up with, was we thought we were better than everybody else because we were young, and we actually had a deep belief in change when you look at some of the things that happened between, let's say, 1966 and 1974 in this country. So it's just it's a way of saying I wish that people understood that what you appear to be now is only a tiny bit of who you are. And where you came from and how you grew up has a lot to do with who you are now, and perhaps you're more sympathetic to, perhaps we're more sympathetic than it appears on the surface if we can figure out how to have a conversation. That's something I wish everybody knew.
I think as a millennial, I'd say our ability to care. In most instances, it seems like we are entitled. I mean, we enter workspaces and we want all that change to happen. I think one of the stereotypes is that entitlement. But as I was thinking about it, I realized that I have often entered spaces where I said, I am looking for mentorship, but actually what I was looking for was a platform. And I find a lot of us do that, like, I actually want to be here, but actually what we mean is I want the artistic director or the CEO to give me the money to do A, B, C, D, E. So it's that thing, but I also know that came from I wanted to see more people like me in the platforms, and I knew that one way to access them is through mentorship and being upskilled. But I do think that our generation really cares deeply and will often, speak about the needs of others and do try to make a difference.
Speaking about caring deeply, Ryan, what do Gen Zs value the most?
Part of me wants to say that Gen Z values are a belief that we are always right, and that we are steadfast in that belief. In terms of breaking walls and breaking barriers and making things not just normal, but celebrating something that isn't normal. I find that the big difference between Gen Z and millennial is sometimes that while we want to do the same thing, we want to reach something, we want to reach a similar goal. A lot of the times Gen Z feels that millennials will do it to the best of their ability within the constraints that have been assigned to them by past generations and by the system in which we're living. But I find that Gen Z, instead of just trying to do the best that we can and to create a sense of normalcy, instead we're going to celebrate the things that make us different and highlight those things so that the end goal is not to make things that were the same for everyone, but to make things different for everyone. to make the entire system and to make the entire way that we do things different. Whereas, for example, like, I think it's awesome to hold a notebook and also hold your phone and to be able to do both. But sometimes Gen Z realizes that the power of being able to do things online, and so why would we always have to carry around a notebook? That could seem unnecessary. It could seem superfluous to do that because we can do everything. Trust us, that we can do those things, and we can actually not just do them to the standard that was prescribed to us, but we can actually do them in a way that's completely different, that maybe older generations might not understand.
How does this make you, let's just take the baby boomers. What's your attitude, what is Gen Z? What is your attitude as Gen Z toward the baby boomers, and how do you deal within a professional, because that's what we're talking about, the workplace. How do you deal with the fact that you have this idea that I think you said we're right?
Gen Z says that, yes.
Okay. All right, so talk to us about how do you interact with baby boomers, and what attitude is in your head when you're doing so, in terms of, let's just say you have a situation where you know you're right, but you got a boss who happens to be my generation.
Sure. And I mean, so like I said, it's something that I value so much and that I wish people would value about our generation, is that we're passionate and we stand for what we believe in. But I also think that there's another side to that coin where sometimes we're a little stubborn and we can't understand why older generations aren't on the same page that we are. I mean, we grew up with the internet and we grew up with social media, so much so that change for us is our normalcy. So the fact that things change like that on a dime, like, we understand how to keep up with that. And I think it was awesome, we were talking and Tori mentioned that technology is almost like learning a language, and for us, Gen Z, we grew up with technology, so for us, we can't understand that people aren't able to keep up with it the way that we are. So I think in terms of Gen Z, something that we should hold on to what we believe in, stay steadfast and stay strong in what we believe in, but also give space for older generations and be patient and teach them and try to make them. I think it's important because I think that's very important to hold that space for them and to, again, like you were saying, understand that older generations were young like us and that there were times when they were in our positions. And so I really think it is important that on both ends, I think the extreme, both baby boomers and Gen Z, to hold space for the other side and know that even though Gen Z is right sometimes, how can we make baby boomers understand that in a way that's digestible to them?
Okay, like many of you, I am struggling with the ideology that Gen Zs are always right. And seriously, but the truth is, isn't that how we all think across generational lines? That we all think that our philosophy and how we think, based on the context in which we were brought up or which we were developed in our craft, is the best and is the right way. Is this dialectical thinking of right and wrong, isn't it a challenge in bridging the generational divide? What can we do around that? What are your thoughts, Merindah?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I didn't even know what I was yesterday. I was like, I don't know if I'm a millennial or a Gen Z or Gen Z or am I a Gen X? I don't know. So I had a conversation with my sister Eva this morning, who told me that I'm actually a Zillennial. Zennial. A Zennial. A Zennial. And so a really good example of that is I still really like to go into shops to try clothes on. But you know, I don't go anywhere without Google Maps. Like if I'm driving my kids to school, I put Google Maps on. So I have this in-between state all the time. But but I mean, I really wanted a hard program for the ISPA program. I was like, where I need to, like, and Eva was like, just Google it. I was like, no. so I'm constantly, there's this tension, right, between the two eras or whatever. But my point is that it's not the way I understand generations and generational divide. It's like very foreign to me. The way that I understand the intergenerational transference of knowledge, which has been done since before any kind of stages that we're now in around capitalism or industrial revolution or whatever, you know, we can look back on and reflect about, we have always as human beings transferred knowledge. And so, you know, my understanding of generational divide actually is that, you know, my lived and embodied experience, which is that of elders, always mentoring is a kind of formal word for something that's much more inherent and much more embedded than mentoring. I wouldn't be where I am today in the arts if it wasn't for the older generations holding me and nurturing me and cultivating me. And there's people who've done this with me in the room today, and you know who you are. I would never have come to ISPA if it wasn't for Laura Colby, who sent me the Global ISPA Fellowship in 2014. You know, like, so the nurturing from those older generations and passing down and transferring the knowledge of our industry and what it is that we're fighting for as Indigenous people in Australia in the performing arts has been passed on to me, and it's a privilege, it's also an obligation, and it's a responsibility, and it sits on my shoulders and it weighs on me because I've been handed a baton and I have to hand that baton to the next generation. And so I'm now of the age where I'm actively seeking out ways that black dance, where I work, can create the conditions to develop a workforce that supports young Indigenous people to learn how to be producers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my understanding, my framework for understanding generational divide is not through this kind of Gen Z millennial thing. It's a different framework for me. So I think that's why I didn't know maybe what I was. Or maybe I'm just actually a baby boomer, I don't know.
Like what you've said reminds me of the apprenticeship system that we have in eastern part of Nigeria. And I want to come to you, Nwabisa, because when we were having this conversation, you were talking about something similar in terms of mentorship and the cultural passing on of the baton. But I want to add a layer to that, which is with the context in which the baton is being passed is constantly changing. How do you evolve whilst it's being passed? Because sometimes, for example, the baby boomers will cringe if any changes are made to things that have been traditionally laid down in the organization or systems of culture.
When I think about a baton or transfer of knowledge, I must think about where or what knowledge. For example, for my cultural background, yes, the baton is passed on, but when I think about theater specifically, we traditionally, are introduced to oral storytelling, not theater. So when I'm the first generation to go to university, so I'm expected to know. I'm expected to teach my adults. My grandparents want me to explain things to them, because I sent you to school. When a form comes in, you must read it, you must tell me the term, because I sent you. But then, now I enter the workspace being that person who is always eager to learn and then share with an adult. But that's different than when you enter the industry, where your mentors within theater, you know, there's a hierarchy. They already know everything and they expect to feed you. But as someone who grew up in an environment where they didn't know what I was doing, when it wasn't even clear what the career trajectories are, I'm used to researching that information myself. I know what I need, I know where I need to go, I know where to get the funds, and that's why I'm coming to you. But then in the workspace, that can be a little bit tricky because the mentor is ready to give to you. And now they don't know what their position is because you have all this information for them. You know, when I think about when I think about my mentors, I'm like, we used to tour, you'd go to this country and like, yeah, I'm an ISPA fellow, and then I already met these directors in this part of the country. You already have that network that they would have introduced you to. And then it puts them in a very tricky position. And I want to say also that because you enter that space and because you want to learn and you want to take from them, you don't want them to feel like they have nothing to offer, because they do have something to offer. You know, you may neglect yourself. You know, I do feel like mentorship requires a level of emotional maturity, because when you get into that space and you can forget who you are, if that makes sense, because I'm entering a new culture that I didn't come from, and it's quite important to be able to know where do I begin and end, and where do my mentors begin and end, because that can get blurry, particularly in the workspace. And it happens because one generation feels how they were mentored is they were given resources, and you are coming in and you're like, I already have these things. I just need you to hold my hand, maybe, or to support me, and to be aware of where my gaps are. I must say, though, that it required me to stop. I really couldn't, there was no way of solving it without putting a hold of everything, resigning from my job, and just trying to engage with my mentors in a different way, through friendship, where I'm not looking for anything from you, and you are not gonna, you're not, it required us to start from the bottom, where it's not transactional. I respect your values, I know who you are, but I need to find myself in this relationship differently, because it's too hard.
Wow. Yeah. Let's breathe on that one. And I think that this layer of conversation makes me want to talk about emotional intelligence and emotional support required in bridging the gap across generations. And Tori, you shared with us in our conversation about one of the things you did based on your emotional intelligence was making space.
Yeah, I did.
Can you tell us more about that?
People who have worked with me will tell you it was not intuitive. But over time, I began to understand how important it is to make space for other people's points of view, and to make space beyond that for what motivates those points of view, right? Part of it is to be able to say, what's underneath this statement, right? What's informing this? This is what we should do. You have to listen. You have to engage in conversations. You have to give up your ownership of the space of being the expert, or the person who's been at it the longest, or who's tried a lot of things that haven't worked, and you want to say, I did that, it didn't work. But you have to give that up. And you have to make, and it's complicated in the workplace, because you can give it up this far, but at the end of the day, at least in a lot of organizations in this country, it's still a hierarchical structure. And you're responsible at the end of the day. But it was learning to give, it was thinking about, and then it was realizing that when I gave people space, I learned stuff, right? It was stuff started coming back at me that helped me see things differently. And I think what it's evolved into, that I'm trying to use more now, is not being prescriptive, right? Because we're at a moment, in this country at least, where the nonprofit, the subsidized theater movement is in its tough times. And when you're trying to help, or come in and help with strategic planning, or listen, you don't want to just say, this is what you should do. You want to say, or you need to say, have you thought about This is what I'm hearing. I remember a time when this was maybe useful and not have any ownership over the idea. To me, that's what giving space is being able to share a thought and then not feel terrible when it doesn't happen.
Tori reminds me of a situation that was extremely important when I came to the Performing Arts Library. I was asking a table of leaders that had been hired what they wanted to do about X. And they all looked at me as if that's your job. That's the decision that you need to make. And within, I would say, weeks, because I said, I don't make decisions without a lot of information. Therefore, I would like to hear what you have to say. And so that seemed to be working. And then I came in one day and there was a big decision to be made. And I was sitting at the head of the table and they were all making the decision. And I raised my hand and I said, I'd like to make the decision too. We've gone from one end of the spectrum to the other. It's so interesting and important to make that space, because I think when people think that you're the only one who can make a decision, then there's real opportunity to do it wrong. And it's so much better if you have other people attending to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can I add to that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think about the way that, in some of the Indigenous performing arts organisations and within the Indigenous performing arts sector in Australia, decisions are sometimes made. And a really good example actually is during COVID, all the First Nations companies in Australia were quite active in policy and submissions to the government around recovery and all the things that we all went through. And I think we defer to our elders. We go to those and we go to the elders of our industry and we seek their advice. And, I think they have authority. They're not authoritative, but they have authority. And so the thing is that I don't think I'm right ever, because in what I've been taught is that there is an infinite amount of truths that can coexist at any given time. And so it's very different. I think what I'm trying to explain is, is going to the respect that we have for elders as well, where we will always, the elders always right, yeah.
Thank you so much. At this point of this dinner, it's time to open up this table. There are microphones out there, and we also have people on stage as well who would want to add to the conversation, and we want to invite you all. So if you have any questions, or if you want to say something, add to this conversation, please do. One of the questions I've pulled out from our wonderful envelope filled with questions is, in your work as cultural leaders, how do you navigate and bridge generational differences to create inclusive and collaborative spaces? Because the essence of this conversation is to find new understanding and new perspectives that would help you as you go back to the work that you do.
Kathy is here. Kathy?
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Barbash. I'm a former orchestra manager, and that brought me into the world of working with China and Cuba. First, congratulations to ISPA, not only on the anniversary, but ISPA has been grappling with the generations issue for well over 15 years. Back in 2007, we decided to experiment with a predecessor of the fellowship program called the ISPA Young Observers. And Johan Zietsman was the CEO at that time, and we each had teenage daughters, and we enlisted them and asked them to bring on friends, and we brought people from the CUNY system, et cetera, to observe and then to tell us, to be the bullshit detectors, as it were. And near the end of the Congress, they had a panel of their own. And what they spoke to was something that we need to remember. One of them, particularly outspoken one, said, don't preach to us, we are not a monolith. You cannot talk about, they were all millennials. You cannot talk about us as we are a monolith and engage with us the same way. And as evidence of that, there were two of them, Johan's daughter, Eber, in conversation with one of the other fellows said, oh, well, I don't think you could kind of spit on a piece of loose leaf paper and call that drama. And the other, a Pakistani named Mustafa Samdani, said, I don't think you could call it theater unless you spit on a piece of paper. So I think we just have to remember that the various generations are not monoliths.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
You got someone up here, and then we can go back this way.
All right, there's someone up there, and then we'll come back to the stage.
That someone is...
Please introduce yourself.
I shall. That someone is Brendan Young-Walsh, based in Amsterdam. In this context, as chairman of Studio 52nd, who help the youngest generation write theatre texts, and then it's performed by professionals. There was one show which was around gender fluidity, and as the son of a trans parent, it was very interesting as a middle generation to sit there and see the youngest generation try to explain to the elders how much forward they already were compared to back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and my generation too. There is a link there with, I think, any business, as there's many managers here too, where the first generation creates something, the second then tries to build it, and they say then the third generation is the one that either breaks it down again or doesn't do anything and just enjoys the benefits. Now that, and this is what I'd like to the youngest generation at the table, I'd like to ask, I think the baby boomers had to change the world due to everything that happened in the world. The generation afterwards then followed the instructions, and your generation is like, yeah, we're not going to do that, as I've heard at the table too. But my question is, how do you think about the generation that comes after you? Which position are you going to take there?
Gen Zs. That's for you.
That's for me. I really think that's, I want to think about it a lot. I just know that Gen Z, and I kind of touched on this before, but we're not really interested in normalcy, and we're not interested in making things normal. I mean, there's the age-old question, is theater reflective of society, or is art and theater actually the one pushing the change in society? So I think if that's a scale, then Gen Z kind of goes towards that we're pushing the art that we're making to be the change, as opposed to just reflecting it in like a minimalist style. Not to bash my millennials, but that's kind of what we've seen a lot, and it's really nice and it's really awesome to reflect things like that. But I think that Gen Z in how we frame our thinking is that we're really not interested in that. And I think that the show that you're talking about is very representative of Gen Z, that we're interested not just in making things normal, but we're interested in exploring the actual things that make you individual, and exploring the things and showcasing them and finding the power and the struggles in the things that make up your identity. Where does that leave the next generation? I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, the end of the day, we're so young. Most Gen Z people we're all under 25. So most of us have not had the opportunity to be in positions of power that are gonna enact the change that we actually want to make. So I'm interested in seeing what happens after. I mean, and it always makes me think that the baby boomers were the ones. You don't trust anyone older than 30. I mean, I can't fathom that, because to me, baby boomers are the opposite of that. So I'm really interested in seeing what comes after. I mean, and I think it depends on the direction that my generation actually takes as we gain force in the workplace. Do we actually follow through with this? By the time that we're the age of the baby boomers, are the people 3 generations after us going to think of us as the old people? Or,
Yes.
Yes.
But can I respond?
Yeah, I want to add a layer to the question is asked, and I want you to respond, Kiki. Is remember when Bamuthi gave the provocation, he talked about the currency of empathy. How does that play in the question that's asked? Please respond.
No. but what I want to bring to the table is this, like, hi, my name is Faye Kabali Kagwa. I work for Assetage South Africa as a curator for our Theatre for Youth Cradle of Creativity Festival, but I also call myself a cultural curator. So when we're talking about our generation and what that means, like, I think we're talking about it in a global sense, but I think even if we're talking about it globally, we also need to look at like the environments in which we grew up in, which really dictates how we view the future and how we view roles. So to your point, you were talking about the baby boomers, like the world crumbling, and then the next generation came and made it better, et cetera, but for some people in the world right now, like if you look at Palestine, if we look at Ukraine, like their world is crumbling right now. It's not crumbling 30 years ago or 40 years ago. I come from South Africa, where we're dealing with the aftermath of apartheid and trying to figure out what that looks like for us. South Africans also like to think that they're different from the rest of Africa, whereas our independence happened 40 years after the rest of the continent, which is why we're seeing a breakdown, I feel, in like South African services. But I also wanted to talk about, like, when we've been talking about a transfer of knowledge, I think it's strange. I really like working with young people, and I think the only way that you can work with young people and people who are older is that you have to have a genuine curiosity, and also you have to validate people's experiences. I was talking to someone about how I feel like in South Africa, for example, we don't have a lot of plays for 10 to 14-year-olds, and I said it's because people don't like. Adults don't like writing stories that have nothing to do with sex, and 10 to 14, and that's what 10 to 14-year-olds are doing. They're figuring out friendship. It's that time in your life where you're like, I have these friends and I have these friends. How do I make them mix? And when you're listening to like a 12-year-old being like, she won't talk to me, there's a tendency to be like, oh my, like, just talk to them, like, they'll be fine. If you trust them and you trust yourself, like, clearly you guys can work it out. But you don't know that yet, right? This is the first time you're encountering that, and that's important, and it's important to give space to that. Just like it's the first time that people are getting older. Like my mom will speak about, us being somewhere and they ask the young people to stand up, like the young woman, and she realizes that they're not talking about her. And I think that although you can laugh at that, that's also something that's really sensitive, and something that I think that we're not good necessarily at hearing each other about, and realizing that there are first experiences for everything. And at the same time, I think that it's important for us. It's problematic if you only deal with younger people or older people only in the working context, because I don't think that that's how societies are supposed to be governed, or that's not how we're supposed to live with each other. But also, I think that working with young people, I've also had to realize that there are so many young people who are younger than me who I have never experienced the things that they're going through. So I don't know what it is to grow up with parents who are going through a divorce. I don't know what it is to grow up with a sibling that has mental health issues, and how that affects it. Like, there are so many things that we can learn from each other, and that learning is not necessarily capped by how old you are.
As a play activist, I have this question to ask. How do we play curiosity? How do we play curiosity in our workspaces, building off of what she said? Yeah.
I'd love to address the question of continuing that curiosity. I'm Michelle Witt. I'm the executive and artistic director of the Meany Center for the Performing Arts at the University of Washington in Seattle. I'm Gen X. I'm around a lot of Gen Zs. I'm also finishing up my doctorate in violin performance and studying the creative process. So I'm around a lot of young people, and we also have a large Gen Z staff. And artists get inspiration from everywhere. And you are all the brain trust of all of our organizations, and how can we hold space for your ideas as we hold space for visiting curators. Bamuti is our artistic partner this year. Rhiannon Giddens will work with us next year. They're Gen X's, but there is so much wisdom in the room. I led the Fellows program here for 10 years, and that is one of the most the wisest, most experienced, and insightful group of colleagues that we have here. And so we need to hold space for you. We need to create platforms for your agency. And I guess the question is, why can't we? Why can't we? And how are we?
There's someone over there. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Socks Whitmore. Yep, like the things on your feet. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I was born after 1996. I won't say when. I'm here with CIPA, the Creative and Independent Producers Alliance Advocacy Organization. Yes, cheers for CIPA. And I also produce events out in Los Angeles. I am a director, creative, performer, all of the things. I originally stood up here to talk about navigating intergenerational resentment as we try to innovate, but then some really interesting questions were brought up, and I found myself thinking about how I personally, in my lived experience, and of course we're grossly oversimplifying everything to have this conversation, because as we said, we're not a monolith, but in my experience, I grew up thinking about the next generation as non-existent. I have grown up believing that the world I live in is dying, and that it has been since I came into it. And I understand that as I've grown up and come to look at history more, that the world has been dying before, and there are often times where we felt as humanity that the world is ending, and then that hasn't been true. So it almost seems like maybe older generations have this reassurance, like, oh, well, the world almost ended before, but it turned out fine. And then for us, it's like, the world's been ending our whole life, and it's never stopped. And I think that the reason I wanted to ask about the resentment is because, for me, I struggled with that for a hot minute. Having this internalized bitterness towards older things, because in my mind, the older things had stolen from my future. And again, we're oversimplifying grossly to even discuss this. I want to learn to appreciate that which came before me and to hold its value. And yet I also am yearning to see more of that older work and older generations be doing the ground laying for us, because it's felt as a younger generation like I had to do my own path paving. I love hearing the stories about mentorship, and I've had some wonderful mentors, and I had to find them myself. They did not show up on my doorstep. It's a very competitive industry, and it always has been. It gets more and more competitive the more humans there are, the more technology there is to create access to the arts. This industry will not stop getting competitive, but it used to be a different type of competitive, and I think that sometimes we're having different conversations about how to even survive in this ecosystem, when maybe we should be talking about how to make this ecosystem survivable. Maybe it was once. I don't know. I've never seen that. And I perpetually learn from people older than myself. I seek to learn, to hear about these other periods in history, these other eras of art that preceded me and laid the foundation for where we're at now. And it's so powerful to have that context. And there was a part of me that resented it so long that I actively abstained from learning, because I felt that to give it my time was to not work towards the future. So I guess this is not really a question anymore so much as a little bit of a monologue, but I wanted to hear from the panelists at the table about navigating this resentment, this bitterness, these intergenerational clashes where we're operating by two different playbooks, or more, many, many different playbooks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to hear, would you like to respond to that? Anyone? Okay.
My love for directing is a love for listening, actually. I believe that directing is about listening, and not only to the verbal things. And I found that I relate better with people when I am able to listen, not only to what they are saying, but what are they feeling in that moment. And like I said in the beginning, for me, it required a stop. It required a pause. I needed a year where I was not looking for an opportunity or mentorship or a job or support, or so that I could be a friend to my mentors, to the people that I look up to the people that I saw as solutions to the problems that I had. But there is also an IETM book by Ausa that I really, really love, and it's titled It Begins with a Conversation. And I think part of the change that we want to see is really, it's in having conversations. What Faith, said, I lost my train of thought, but I started thinking about cultural differences and how focusing on the workspaces can be a representation of how society is. So while in my culture, it is quite respectful to not speak up to adults, because they are always right. But in the workspace, that's not healthy. You must be able to say what you need, So I do feel there's a need for de-biasing techniques. It's also just being aware of my own triggers. It's like when I'm listening to someone and something comes up, and instead of saying, they are making me feel this way, to try and understand, why am I triggered? So not only listening to them, but also listening to myself. Because again, directing is that. For me, when I'm watching my actor, the performers, I'm the first audience, and what I'm feeling is what dictates what happens next.
Nwabisa, you remind me of, You remind me of a book that I'm reading titled The Garden Within. And listening is such a powerful tool. I wanted to hear from her because she's been on the table for a while.
You were actually first.
Oh, he was? All right, great.
No, wait my turn.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll go first because I think what I'm going to say is actually adding onto that. 大家好, I'm Nelson. I'm from Singapore. I'm the co-founder and artistic director of 9 Years Theatre. In a way, I'm just musing about the title Generation Divide. Right, that we put the word divide there as if that it's going to be problematic right from the beginning, in a way. And I'm just musing about the fact that it's interesting that we work very hard to embrace diversity. People from different cultures, like you say, different cultures, different country, different kind of a background. But what if we think of generation as different cultures? Essentially, they are different cultures. Generation is culture. And so our job is actually to embrace that diversity. That divide is diversity in a way. Yeah. So it's just kind of like changing the mindset a little bit. And I like what Tori was saying about making space. And for me, I find that in my career, I've reached sort of a point where my task is to learn how to step away, not just stepping aside. Aside means that you're still beside, but you make way, you step away in a way. And just to share one last point that, in the Chinese language, interestingly, we say generation as 世代 in a way. And the 代, that word, essentially there's another meaning underneath, which means to replace. So it's a kind of a given sometimes that we are working towards replacement. We can't be here forever. So that's something I think important to think about.
Thank you.
Ooh, all right, I came up with one thing and now there's so many things. I'm Shelley Kiala. I'm the executive director of the International Festival of Arts and Ideas in New Haven, Connecticut. I've been there for a little over 3 years. And I wanted to respond actually to your question about how do you play curiosity, because I think that's a really critical question to how to create spaces where we live and work, right? I think that I loved what Faye said about we shouldn't just be seeking relationships with differentiated people with different identities than us in workplaces, but in our lives, in our day-to-day. I think, for me, it's been about letting go of perfectionism and trying to find one answer and really embracing. And this is why I love theater. This is why I got into it, because I love to play and I like to try things and experiment and see how they go and then try them again. And that's I think as a leader of an organization or in any positional place with a position of power, being able to model that, embrace it, and make it the norm is so key, because that's how we all learn together in these spaces that are collaborative. So I think that's really important. And then I heard the passion about letting go of resentment, which that's a lifelong journey, isn't it, for so many of us? I think, for me, thinking about folks that have come before me, I'm Gen X, so I'm like right in the middle, often forgotten. We haven't talked a whole lot about Gen X up here yet. But for me, like remembering that people aren't a monolith, and that just as there were people that have been dumping toxins in the ocean for hundreds of years, there have also been for hundreds of years people fighting for the opposite of that. And that I can see myself, rather than attaching my narrative or my story to the anger against the folks that have been doing what I don't value, that I can find resilience and hope and love by attaching myself and my story to the people that have the values that I hold. And so that's an opportunity we have as storytellers, right, to tell those stories.
Thank you. I see Mentong. Hi.
Hi, thank you. I'm Meng Tong Guan. I'm a senior producer here in New York City at Lincoln Center. I was really glad that Nelson, you just brought up the title of today's conversation is Generation Divide. I want to ask people on the stage and also in the house, what if we look at it as the generation continuity? So instead of thinking of replacing the generations or resentment, what are we bringing into the generations that are following and in service to each other's generation? And it's a continuity only when we're not thinking about what marks am I living in the place, instead of what are we providing and servicing to each other to provide for the generations. Then maybe that's the other side of this conversation.
Thank you, Mentong.
Can I respond to that? Okay. I think that that really resonates with me, because being Indigenous, we're still living in the colony. Like, Australia is still a colonized country, and the way that I was talking before about having the baton handed on to me, really, and the way that I understand the differences in these different generations is really shaped by this idea that we're all still fighting to have our own freedom, to have our own land, to have our own culture, to regenerate our culture, to maintain our culture, to be able to survive. And so I'm not resentful at any of my elders. I worship them, not unquestionably, but like, they fought so hard for us, for the generation that's coming up, and the struggle and the progress that has been made has been at great sacrifice. They have made huge sacrifices for me to be able to be leading a performing arts company today. That's been at their expense, and for some elders, for most elders, that is unrecognized, and they're the heroes, and so I personally don't have resentment towards the older generation. I have the opposite. I have nothing but love and gratitude, and then that passes down that sense of responsibility, because our freedom is not resolved as Indigenous people in Australia. I don't know if any of you heard, there was this thing called a referendum, and the whole of Australia voted no, because they thought Indigenous people, we should not have the right to self-govern our own lives. So for me, it's not even an option to be resentful. Like, we're still fighting to have self-determination and our freedom. And so, yeah, that I can't subscribe to Gen Z, to Millennial, to Gen X, because for people who are fighting for representation or against racism or systems that don't serve them, like, there's a different thing going on, I think, for me. Yeah.
We're gradually coming to the end of the session, and I still see people, and so we're going to be brief in our responses so that we can get to everyone. We have less than 10 minutes to wrap up the session.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Olga Garay English, and I'm one of 2 directors of a new initiative called the National Latinx Theater Initiative that gives grant support and other professional development support to Latinx theaters in the United States and in Puerto Rico. You know, we've been talking a lot about generational differences as it pertains to sort of individual groups. What I'd like to talk about is generational differences in the ecosystem of our sector. And this is ISPA, the International Society of Performing Arts, and we're celebrating our 75th anniversary. And so when I was your age, there was all of this support, at least in the United States, for people like me to attend international conferences and create networks and learn from people in other cultures. And all of that seems to be dissipating more and more every year. And so the challenge that I want to put out there to this group is, because I really believe, I mean, now we have the, you know, the technical stuff, which didn't exist when I was your age. So there are new technologies and advantages that we can bring to the table. However, I think that the one-on-one connectivity and friendship and collaboration, you cannot change that. You cannot supplant that. And so I want to really make a challenge to this group of people that came from great lengths to come and be here, to start thinking more creatively about how we can continue to meet as a sector in the presence of one another.
I like that very much. What this resonates with me as a student of social therapeutics is embracing the fact that humans are social beings, are relational beings, are performers, are improvisers, are revolutionaries. And that if we embrace that and not miss that connectivity, it's important. I see another person over there. Let's hear from you.
Thank you. My name is Zoya Kachadurian. I am from New York. I work in theater, television, and large corporate events. I am 73 years old. I still work. I'm not clinging to my job. I work. I'm hired by, work with, and mentor people of all the other generations, and that's still going on. So I don't think it's as rigid as my boomer sisters have depicted it. I want to say that the frustration, however, that I have, and I own it as a boomer, for the younger generations who have information like this at their fingertips is sometimes the lack of curiosity, is sometimes not knowing history, including theater history. My generation broke a lot of theater. We had theater of the absurd, we had street theater. You know, we were the ones that started Earth Day, started feminism. But aside from that, what I want to suggest is, you say that things change on a dime, which is true. So I would like to ask, even if it's not answered here, are we understanding the risk that things change that fast in terms of the future? And to encourage, as this gentleman said, for us not to make assumptions. In this country, we make assumptions about generations, we make it about culture, we make it about politics, and that is what is dividing and destroying America. And if we think across everything and consider other points of view of other generations, of other politics, of other cultures, we'll be the strongest and the most artistic world. And that's my hope for the next generation.
Thank you for... Over to you.
So, yes.
1 minute.
Sorry, we don't have a lot of time. One thing I want to say, Ryan, yes, you will be old. It happens to all of us. One day you're young. I wish it didn't have to happen. I hate it, but we will all be old and die. And it will be a continuity, I think. And I think that's valuable. And what I want to say to you about the older generation is that like everybody's doing the best they can. And you know, you're learning with your parents as they get older and you get older. you look at them, oh, I hate your ass, you did all these wrong, all these bad things. But then we all are trying, and everybody has, we all try to do the best we can with what we have. And one more thing is that you're choosing, I think, I feel a responsibility to talk to you as an older man, to tell you, you're choosing a career and an industry that is on the good side of this. It's not a thing that's, as hard as it is, it's not the money, it's not all that, it's creating beauty and happiness, and that's valuable, and you're doing it. So I want to say that.
Thank you. One last contribution.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my name is Jenny Bilfield. I'm the president and CEO of Washington Performing Arts, which, like ISPA, was founded by Patrick Hayes. So there's this wonderful symmetry in the fact that we are all gathered together to do exactly what his vision was throughout his entire career as an impresario, as the creator of a fully integrated performing arts organization that served as the basis for many of the organizations that we represent from around the world, was to bring people together to discuss these crucial matters that impact both art and society. And he was a visionary in many ways, and I consider him one of our field's elders. I wonder if everybody is as aware of how revolutionary he was in supporting what we now call diversity and equity and inclusion, because this is something that he lived in desegregating theaters in Washington, D.C., appointing in 1965 a black chairman of the board in a segregated city. And there are examples in our history that should prove as tremendous reassurance that this is a process, this does not end, and in fact, that if we forget our origins, then it is at our peril. We have to invest in the future of wonderful new voices and to honor the individuality of people's self-expression. And at the same time, we have to have this solidarity as we come together in both analog and digital form. We're here in an analog setting, and we're using the digital experience to enhance that. And to embrace these as tools of connection and the sharing of ideas. And echoing my colleague or hopefully soon to be friend from New York, because I am a New Yorker, that's the only identity that I choose to attribute to myself, that there are factions outside of this very progressive environment that would seek to divide us. So they would use the generational divide, the racial divide, the ethnic divide, and the cultural divides as a way of creating factions, and within those, they break us down. And we have a really important role that we play as community builders who are also equally invested in art, which is to make sure that the separations that we see in our wider society evaporate in an environment of understanding and community in our performance spaces, because there is a critical assault on democracy now, and what we have seen today in the new works, what we have discussed, is all about the exchange of ideas and the celebration of individuality, whether you're 80 years old or you're 14 years old or 25 years old. So we have to protect this. This is what Patrick Hayes wanted. This is what 75 years later, the leaders in this room and of ISPA aspire to in bringing us together optimistically. We have to make sure that when we're here next year, that we have leaders who support this.
Thank you.
The end.
Thank you. Jackie, I couldn't find a better way to round up this session. Wouldn't you agree?
Okay.
It was really good. You stayed awake. You were at the table. We really appreciate it. Thank you, all of you.